And I think of all these things that I've learned from my parents, through all the busyness and all the adversity and all the zillions of people, that come in and out of camp and the mayhem and, the fatigue. And I think I come back to that every day. I'm like, I'm very grateful, A, that I can do the work, but B, that I'm getting to be the person who I used to look up to. And that means the world to me.
I'm so excited today because I have as my guest somebody I've known his entire life who literally was born into a family business that I had the great pleasure of being a part of as a camper and as a camp counselor. His name is Jeremy Starz, who is the director and co-owner of Camp Nicolet for Girls up in Eagle River, Wisconsin. And my excitement today is that with Women's History Month and being an influence of inspiring and empowering young women and getting the opportunity to work with his mom and carry on his legacy that his grandparents started, I am super excited to hear his point of view on what his purpose and passions are and how he is taking a stand as a man to raise up women in the world that we know it, as well as environmentally dealing with nature and climate change and running a family business and being an entrepreneur and being a creator. So there's many things we're going to touch base on. Sit back, listen in, join us around the campfire. This is where the Camp Beefy Uncensored podcast got inspired from all my years at camp. And I look forward to you listening in. Hold that thought. Hey, Jeremy. So good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome, Felicia. It's good to be here with you today. It's been a long time since we've seen each other face to face, I feel like.
It has been a long time. And I want to let you know what you may or may not know, the inspiration for my Camp Beefy Uncensored podcast, it stems from my years and time at Camp Nicolet. So we'll get into all of that. But the camp part is because I always loved the purity of that environment and how raising people up, especially girls in my experience, was, just the foundation of all things going forward. Fifi being the nickname that I'm called by my nieces and whomever. And uncensored sure. Because there isn't anything that I won't talk about or that I probably almost haven't experienced, but that you couldn't sit down with me. And if, I don't know that you would remember this as a young boy, but that was the person who I thought of myself at camp, was the person that anybody could come to, besides, of course, your parents or your grandparents. So I just want to thank you. And I want to say, this is Jeremy Starz, who's the owner and the director of Camp Nicolet for Girls up in Eagle River, Wisconsin. And you're also, are you radio operations and coordinator and host of WXPR as well in Eagle River?
I'm still a volunteer host for WXPR Public Radio. I passed the operations torch to a really great gentleman who took over from me, actually, back in, it was pre-COVID. So I think it was May of 2019, passed that torch and chose to focus on what we do out at camp, and to really give Camp Nicolet my all there.
Well, let me say that knowing that I've known you since, basically birth.
Yeah.
And to see how you have, speaking of carried a torch, taken a third generation family owned business and leverage this legacy through lots of different, evolutions, economics, pandemics, you entering into a quarter of a century, because it's like at least 21 years, right, that you've been doing this with your mom?
Yes, this is my 21st season at Camp Nicolet professionally.
I mean, Jeremy, I'm even though I'm sitting, I'm standing here applauding you because I know what that takes. I don't know that you know this about myself, but I too was raised in a third generation industry. And it actually, during the time that my sister Andrea and I became campers at your family's camp, was actually sadly when my family was just going to start going through that transition of not being able to hold on to their family business, which is why we couldn't continue as campers going to the camp. So we only went for 2 years in the mid 70s. And I made a promise to myself that nobody knew I promised to myself. This was just my promise to me that I kept to me, that when you guys could pay me to come back, I would come back. And that was something that when I think about if I am ever getting off the path of my truth, or am I capable of manifesting greatness, or can I see my goals through, I think to my foundation of these elements of that I experienced as a young girl. One being, I made a promise to myself that I would go back to Camp Nicolet, because it made such a huge impression. And so that's what I did. And being that the American Camp Association has a ruling that you either have to be 18 or have a year of college in order to be a camp counselor, being a September baby, I had to, in fact, wait a whole college year before I could come actually apply to be a camp counselor. And your parents were amazing, Jeff and Georgie Starz, welcoming me back. So I hadn't been there since I was 12 years old. I came back at 18. I'd only had 2 years there as a camper. You know, that was a pretty lofty thing to do, considering many of my peers had been there for 2, 5, 8 plus years. Who was I to think that I could come back to this camp that people may or may not remember, but knowing farewell that you accepted lots of people in the positions of counselors who had no connection to camp. So I just needed to fulfill and complete that chapter. And lots of things had happened between the time that we weren't there as campers and then I came back as a counselor. We lost our businesses, our parents divorced, and our father died.
Oh, Felicia, yeah.
And economically just really, and then that's why I ended up at Wayland Academy, where we both ended up going to school.
Right.
Because I went from being that class president and first cellist and straight A student and national award-winning artist to saying to myself, well, what's the point if everything can just be pulled out from under? And your mom, by the way, both your parents, your grandparents as well, great influences on my life. But your mother, particularly at age 11, when I was 11, I already knew I wanted to be a medical illustrator. So your mom was the influence of, because she was trained as a medical illustrator, she was a photographer, she was an artist. I looked up at your mom like she was just everything. So huge influences that your family bloodline has had on my purpose and my family. And I'm just so very grateful. So let's get into it, because I wanted to give you that little bit of feedback. So as a little boy growing up and being surrounded by this extraordinary national forest and this camp that your grandparents and parents had built, you know, what do you recall as a little boy, just, you know, being around all this activity and all this nature that inspired you? Like, what were those first hits on you that you recollect?
Sure. So growing up out at Camp Nicolet, and this is something that's funny. I always joke with people a little bit about this, you know, when we're first making introduction and that sort of thing. It's funny that my grandparents started a girls' camp. My mom and my dad carried it forth. My mom carried it forth beyond, you know, their marriage. And lo and behold, my mom has 2 boys, you know, who are to be the 3rd generation owners of this all girls camp. So, you know, that's a little bit of tongue in cheek there. And to your question, what I remember about that being a little boy at an all girls camp, you know, most of the percentage of my youth, you know, is exists outside of camp time. So
Yeah.
there are the summers that sort of encapsulate, you know, June, July, and August, some, you know, summers of your youth sort of. But I was a Red Arrow camper when I was, you know, basically age 7 through 12, 13. And I had some really great experiences at that camp, you know, independent of being at Camp Nicolet. But I think what's fun is I think of the rest of the year. I think of the balance of the year, and playing outside, going out into the woods and being creative. And I think that's something that I'm really grateful for in adulthood, because I'm not afraid to be creative because of basically having to go out and self-entertain, you know, around the house or in the woods or in that environment or in the lake, you know, and we were always really active. So, you know, we were given the chance to make things. My brother and I built a snowboarding hill behind our house once upon a time in the winter. We would throw snow up into big piles on the lake in front of our home and dig out igloos. Mom had us, you know, racing sled dogs at a very early age. That was a family activity that we all did together.
Yeah.
Downhill skiing, cross country skiing. I remember that even with my father, you know, that's very important to me. A memory, you know, of doing some stuff with him when I was really small.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I remember, you know, as a child at camp, is just having the opportunity to be outside all the time, you know, and be creative and be active. And I think that knowing how important those things were to me then, that is a lot of my inspiration to, you know, pay it forward to the kids who come to camp now in the summer.
You know, it's really interesting because for you, that was your backyard. For me,
Yeah.
I also was raised in a really beautiful environment and then had the opportunity to spend lots of my life up in Wisconsin, Eagle River being one of them, Minocqua being Madison, Wisconsin, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, like Beloit, Wisconsin. Not that Beloit is considered the most beautiful city, but Wisconsin in general. And you know, so I knew that nature was a huge influence on me. And then I remember learning later on, probably in my early adult life, especially when I started my career in Chicago, how lots of inner city kids never saw anything but cement. And we're not talking like New York City. We're talking Chicago. And Chicago has, you know, earth and greenery around it, but like never having the opportunity to take a hike in nature, know what it's like not to have noise around them, know what it's like to listen to the birds or just stare out at the water or look up at the sky and look at the stars at night, or know what it's like to have a moment where you actually, speaking of creative, get your hands in the dirt and maybe even build your own campfire from nothing. And by going into the earth, you find those stones that you end up lining into a circle and collecting your wood and being able to build a fire and maybe even be able to cook a meal for those around you. Like, what? You know, and to me, those are things that really, even though I'd gone to several camps before I got to Camp Nicolet, day camps, 1 week away camps, you know, starting with overnight, 1 night, 1 week, 2 week, 4 week. By the time I built up to Nicolet, and of course, you know, the funny thing is that, you know, some people can say an 8-week camp. Now, I know your guys' sessions have shifted since we were kids, but people would be like, you know, why would a parent send their child away for 8 weeks? Well, my parents weren't sending us away. We were never the sent away kids. Our parents had the perspective of how do we help our children become more expansive in mind, be more independent in their ability to function as human beings. How can we grow their connections and their network? And I don't think it came out in those words because we were coming from Rockville, Illinois. We weren't coming from the suburbs where all these kids were going to school together, maybe, or in different parts of the country that had more concentrated attendees or campers. So it was really just like throwing it out there. And we were lucky to have a family, the Warrens, Martha and Nancy Warren's parents, who
Sure.
must have had some sort of influence on our parents that got us to be able to, because my brother was always already going to Timberlane. So he had been at Timberlane since he was a little boy. So we were very, very familiar. So, you know, as a little boy, you're growing up, you've got your grandparents, huge influence, I would imagine, had to have been, looking up at them, watching what they're doing. Same with your parents.
Yep.
And, you know, as you're formulating all these ideas as you're growing up, what was striking you of things that were coming into your brain that were your passions? I get that you were creative and you could take your own initiatives, but what were like really like sticking to you that you always wanted to do?
Yeah, to answer this question, I want to address a few specific things or people, because this is a big question. I want to talk about my grandparents for a little bit first. And I want to give you a perspective of them that you may not know from their camp personalities, if you will. I want to talk a little bit about my personal relationship with them. You know, when your family owns a summer camp, especially in the wintertime, you know, mom and dad at first, and then mom would go out on the road to recruit families, to interview staff, to promote the business. And I always remember the winters, you know, between January and basically the first part of March, where my grandparents would take care of my brother and I. So we got to live with them basically up at their house for, I don't know, you know, 6 weeks or something like that. And they're very special to me because my grandmother would cook us all kinds of really good food. And we got to learn about our German heritage, if you will, through, you know, her cooking and stories about our family, you know, overseas. And our family here in the States is really small, but over in Germany, there are a few branches of it, you know, that are a bit more expansive. But my grandfather, you know, as my grandmother would feed us and, you know, make sure we were comfortable and all that sort of thing, my grandfather would hang out with us, you know, and he would tell my brother and I stories. You know, we could give him topics. Obviously, this is going to hit close to home, but we'd ask him to tell us Winnie the Pooh stories all the time, you know, and it wasn't him reading the book. It was him making up the continued adventures, you know, of Winnie the Pooh. And my grandfather would sit and talk with us for hours about, you know, Winnie the Pooh, you know, and we'd hang out and eventually turn the television on and watch the nightly news and we'd all settle down. But what I remember, Felicia, is my grandparents providing a foundation that was very settled and very firm. I believe you said that your parents divorced. Mine did as well. And I think, you know, not to make anything anybody's fault at all, but when you come from a divorced household, things don't always feel super settled at home. But well, my mom worked her butt off to continue the camp business and to make sure things were going well. And I totally get what she was having to do at that point with that. My grandparents picked up kind of the parenting slack, if you will, and provided that foundation for us. So through the ages of, you know, probably 5 through, let's call it, you know, the time I went off to Wayland at 14, I guess. So 5 through 13, you know, my grandparents were always there for us. And that was really cool. And I actually wrote my entrance essay to Wayland. You know, they make you write an essay when you apply to go to the school. And the question that particular year, I guess in the fall of 1992 or whenever I applied to go to Wayland was, you know, who is your hero? And I wrote an essay about Wendell Schrader, my grandfather. I identified him as my hero. And I can't exactly tell you what that essay was about right here and now, other than the fact that, you know, I watched my grandfather continue to stay involved in Camp Nicolet, even, you know, in the early 90s as he was aging. And my grandmother did too. She would see things and weigh in on those things. But my grandfather would quietly cruise around and he had his tools with him. And if he saw something that needed to be fixed, he fixed it. he's like 82 or 83 at this point, you know. I saw him interact with people. I saw him talk to campers. I was able to witness his personality during those times. And I think something somewhere subconsciously in me was like, wow, I love his personality. I love who he is. And I don't think I voiced that in my Wayland entrance essay, but I know that now as an adult, that that's what I admired the most about him, was how he interacted with people and how much he and my grandmother both, and my mom too, cared about Camp Nicolet and the people who came there, and they wanted things to continue on forward in a certain way. Now, side topic is that, you know, sometimes as things evolve, you have to let go of certain things. And then that's been part of my process as an adult, is, you know, there's some things that if you want them always to be a certain way with camp, it could drive you nuts, right? So I've had to back off of some of those things just a little bit, and to use some wisdom from Georgie Starz, you know, pick my battles. But on the whole, you know, watching the investment that my grandparents had in camp, and watching how much they cared about the people there, and how much they cared about my brother and I, and provided that foundation for us. I think that's something. You asked me, you know, what really hits as far as, you know, childhood memories. That's one of those things, in addition to, you know, being creative.
You know, it's super interesting, Jeremy, because I don't think you started out where you didn't think, or maybe you didn't know what I knew about your grandparents, what have you. First of all, no surprise whatsoever how much they were an influence, as and both your grandparents, and how they created that stability. Our families are so organically tied to one another in the most subtle of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I can begin to describe, i.e., my grandparents are very much like your grandparents. They were our foundation. Certainly my mother, the maternal side, they were the household that we always knew we had to have to launch from. Even though our house was always in our right there, our grandparents were always there. They were always creating the foundation, the food, the stories, the stability. That's where we could be. Your grandparents, for me as a child, and then for me as a young adult, were so available and so consistent. Your grandmother rather, had like the real stoic, like she was like, you know, your grandfather was the quiet master and king of the land, but your grandmother was the one who, you know, led the charge. Like he, like, you know, and when I say she led the charge, I mean she was really like she felt like the firmer of the two, but in the most accountable sorts of ways, because she took that responsibility on, as many women do, not because men don't, but just, you know, as she did. And nobody was to cross Ann Schrader.
No.
Nobody. Because you'd be called out on it if you did.
Right.
She'd pull you aside and be like, this isn't how we do things, so let's get it together. That's basically a paraphrasing of who she was. So you never wanted to displease Ann Schrader, whether you're a camper or a counselor. And I feel very, very fortunate that between 1980 and 1984, I got to go back as a young woman who had already now lived a lot of life. I wasn't the richest kid. I had done a lot of growing up, because life faced me with that, and I still showed up, and I wanted to find, you know, be responsible, find myself, and live out my truth. And that environment allowed me to do that and lead accordingly. And your grandparents created that environment, and your parents continued to share that responsibility to continue to provide that environment. And your grandfather, to me, it's ironic being a boy or a man being a part of this legacy. I was raised in women's fashion, and it was men and women. My father was the next generation of that legacy. Mm-hmm. And at 14, I was working for my family business.
Yeah.
So, I understand like where you go, well, how does that fit into it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If this is part of who you are and this is part of the legacy you want to carry, the sex shouldn't matter, right? The gender shouldn't matter.
Correct.
So, and I say this all the time to people, don't limit your beliefs in what you think is meant to be or should be, because who's to say? Who made the rules? It's a mindset, right? Yep. So I think that mindset, going on to mindset, your grandparents set an extraordinary mindset that influenced so many lives, positively changed so many lives in their very quiet, stoic, stable, foundational ways. And your mother is a product of that. And the irony is your mother was the shyer version of, and yet hugely successful in everything she did. She put her mind to something, Georgie Starz was going to be at the top of her game, no matter what she did, whether it was athletics or academics. I mean, it was just like, and yet she wasn't one to toot her horn, which was even more right at all. I mean, she would be like the one over here, like, don't look at me, don't talk to me, because I'm just too like introverted. Whereas your father, by the way, was the extrovert in the couple, in the way that gave that great balance. So he was it wasn't that Georgie, your mom, wasn't approachable. On the contrary, in a very quiet, soothing sort of way, she would deliver and get out. Mm-hmm. That's how she would give you what you needed, and she'd move on to the next thing. Your father, I have also very warm thoughts about your father. Like your father at Parents Weekend, I would go into the shtick about, I'd start yelling, hello, Polly, hello, Esta, and I'd start doing this thing across the field next to the tennis courts as like I'm pretending like I'm one of the parents, in platform heels coming across the grass field, all done up in the suburban outfit. Like, God forbid the heel goes through the grass. And he would be cracking up. And I knew what I was talking about because, this was the epitome of potentially the parent that might be showing up. Yeah. And with love, I would do that. And he and I had that very special interaction. They all fueled me to find confidence. They all fueled me to go out into the world because I had lost my confidence. And it's a funny thing because as a young girl, it doesn't matter as a young boy either. It doesn't matter how foundational things are, how much is or isn't provided. You got to pull it up from within and have your own light that you never shut off, because there's a lot of external elements that will come along and try to knock you off your block. Mm-hmm. And the beautiful thing about camp is it keeps showing you that you can keep getting up on the horse, you can keep getting up on the skis, you can keep swimming that lap, you can keep hitting that tennis ball, you can keep communicating with your campmates to find harmony, you can learn to live together and powerfully together raise each other up.
Something I'd like to talk about a little bit, Felicia, if I could, is I would like to talk about my mom, because in the description of my grandparents, we said they provided foundation, basically. And a little bit later on in life, let's say the awareness starts at 6, 7, somewhere in there, right? And this is after my dad has gone, on his way to a different life. But with my mom, what I became aware of is her investment in camp, but her determination to pull through some difficult things. And you mentioned at the top of our talk just about the evolution of camp and moving through some tough things, the most recent being the pandemic, of course. But I think at that age, about 7 years old or so, was about the time that I witnessed camp having its tragic van accident, which involved a handful of our staff, actually, and two of them passing away. And what I witnessed as a child at that point was my mom shifting it into high gear to do whatever she could, to basically save the business. And she worked with my grandparents to do that. And it's actually interesting. I draw my remarks right now off of the evidence of for our estate planning attorneys. That's a whole nother thing, but our estate planning attorneys, I was reviewing our old corporate binder a month or so back, and just getting historical context of what had been done, for some future planning. Yeah. But the point being is that I reviewed the notes, the corporate minutes that were made during those years, and I saw in writing for the first time the very difficult things that my mom and my grandparents worked through, i.e., who is going to be the camp director, in 1987? Are there external couples outside of the family that they're talking with about that or not? At the end of the day, my mom agreed year after year after year to be in charge of stuff at camp, working with different people, working with a constantly changing team, and doing her very best. And I'm sure working with some, probably some interpersonal challenges too, dealing with, lost relationships with the staff who were, and families who were involved in the van accident. I know that she traveled with Marla Barnard over to the UK to go meet with some of the affected families of the staff members from the accident personally, to try to maintain some personal relationships there. But on the other side, working with a marketing company to, try to craft messages that can't, yes, this tragedy happened at Camp Nicolet, but everything is going to be okay, and you can continue to trust camp and our organization and continue to send your children there, and it's going to be okay. And these are all the things that we continue to do year in and year out, that provide a safe environment. So maybe that part's not as touchy-feely as the description of my relationship with my grandparents, but what I saw there during that time from my mom was the dedication and the resiliency. And as I've worked through some difficult things in my early 30s, you talk about things coming up in life that you lose your confidence. It's taking all of those pieces from the various members of my family, and my father's kindness too. I see how he interacts with people, and I don't want to take a thing away from my dad because I love him very, very much. Yeah. But, taking all those good elements, those things that you learn from your parents and your grandparents, and as a young adult and then eventually middle-aged adult, trying to put those in practice and trying all of a sudden, and I'm going to steal this quote, but from a young gal who worked for us. She was a Northpoint Adventures intern at 17 back in 2019. Her name is Sophie. And I interviewed Sophie actually at the end of 2018 for an alumni video piece that we did for our 75th anniversary. And Sophie wrapped up her interview with me by saying, in an answer to the question, Sophie, is there anything else you'd like to tell people? She said, Jeremy, the most important thing to me about camp, she said, is I got to be the person I used to look up to. Sophie, as a Northpoint Adventures intern and as a young staff member, got to be the person that she used to look up to. And I think of all these things that I've learned from my parents, through all the busyness and all the adversity and all the zillions of people, that come in and out of camp and the mayhem and, the fatigue. And I think I come back to that every day. I'm very grateful, A, that I can do the work, but B, that I'm getting to be the person who I used to look up to. And that means the world to me. Absolutely. And Sophie put that perfectly. And it was a thought that I had never had before up until I heard that from her.
Well, I personally think that going back to carrying a torch and being the collective of all of whom you come from, your bloodline and your influences, is nothing but uttered to be proud of, and to be able to recognize and reflect. And that is where you're at this point, and what Sophie said. I get that. And going back to your mom just for a second.
Yeah, for sure.
Your mom, again, reminds me of my mother, because my mother at 42 was not only all of a sudden a divorcee, but within a month's time, my father collapsed at her feet and was left with no, life insurance, was left with no income other than her $8,000 public school teacher income.
Yeah.
Was, our house was attached to an SBA loan. How my mother kept us three kids ages 11. I literally had turned 15 the week before. That was the last time I saw my father, was my birthday. And my brother was 19. How she kept that roof over her head, kept the house, kept everything going, kept her sanity, showed up to work every day, functioned in a way that I, to this day, have no idea, no different than your mother in being faced with, now what moments of, we've got to do this. Yes, having her parents, but at the same time, really having to pull up her bootstraps and prove her strengths and her resilience. She is my hero. She is who got me to Wayland, because at that point, I said in my sophomore year, as I went from that straight A or AB student to now I'm doing C's and D's, doing things I shouldn't be doing, losing myself through this, on this path, turning to her one day and saying, if you don't get me out of here, I'm never going to make it to college. And that wasn't who Felicia was, but that's how I felt at the time. And my brother had just graduated from boarding school on the East Coast, and we sought them out. They had already given away their financial aid, other major schools. I mean, my mom took me to the East Coast. How? I have no idea. She took me to see all the major Phillips Exeter, Andover, Berkshire, all these major schools, none of whom would give us money. It was Wayland that gave us money, gave me the opportunity to get back up on the horse.
Yep.
And to show up my junior and senior year and do some pretty unstoppable things at the time, even while I was still that unconfident girl. I mean, the funny thing is, people never describe me that way. They never describe me not having confidence. They describe me a whole other way because of how I must present myself to them. But my point is we have these women in our lives. We have these family lineages in our lives that have helped put us into a skin of our own, that we know where we come from. We know who we walk with. We know who's with us, so to speak, whether you think that way or not. When you speak, how you show up, how you carry yourself, they are traveling through us, and we are carrying forward that torch. And we just lost our mom 2 years ago, literally 2 weeks before the pandemic, the country shut down. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe, Jeremy, my mother, as she was back then, and she was to the day she took her last breath, was that very intuitive, influential. She was why we ended up at Camp Nicolet. It was for no other reason. My mother made sure that we got the best, the best, the best.
Yep.
And, it's a funny thing because, when you think about like taking a stand, or you fighting for something that, matters, or, being influenced by or inspiring, and how you get shaped, and, where you want to take that torch going forward, seeing all the things that you've seen, living the life you lived now, as you call it, being you're, in your 40s now, right?
Correct. Yep.
So you've lived, knock wood, no less than half your, you've lived maybe half your life, because your legacy will go on for quite some time, meaning you and your body. When you think of this, when you think of all the things that have been inspired to you, where are you at in regards to what you want to provide for the camp, what you want to provide for young women? I mean, it's right now, it's Women's History Month, and you guys have influenced so many women's lives for 7 decades throughout not only the United States, but many other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And the influences that you put and are created for these young women, and that you, for now the last 21 years, have, as an adult, been able to see the influences of. How does that make you feel, and what inspires you to, like, when you see these young women formulating, how does it light your fire?
Yeah, so there's some big items here that I think would be fun to talk about, and then there's some, I get caught up sometimes in the minutiae too. That's oftentimes out at camp. It's all the little small things that create the bigger experience. So a couple different things that I want to talk about is long term. I think you asked me, in relation to Women's History Month and a lasting legacy and that sort of thing. My hope, Felicia, and I don't want to misrepresent any conversations that my mom and I have had about this or anything like that, but my hope is that I'd like Camp Nicolet to go beyond the Starz family. I know that I'm 3rd generation. I don't have any children. The kids who come to camp, I've always in my lifetime sort of thought of them as my kids, or at least in the last 21 years, and
Sure.
working with them on on trips and things like that. But I would like to see, at least by the time I'm 62, 63, 65, God willing, I last that long, that there be some sort of a foundation or a board or something like that in place for Camp Nicolet, mm-hmm. so that, that our family can pass a torch again, maybe mm-hmm. to a board that oversees the operation of the camp and that hires, key personnel to run it. Mm-hmm. I mean, as I've reached 42, turning 43 this summer, that's really my long range vision for the camp is sustainability, and what happens beyond 3rd generation ownership. Yeah. And part of what I'm really excited about is that there are other camps up in this area, really good camps, who have followed that same model and they've been successful. Maybe they haven't had the luxury or the built-in, if you will, of a 3rd generation owner. Maybe they ended at 2 generations in that family, or just one. But point being is that they've been successful with the foundation type model or the board of directors type model. So while I don't have any specific vision or, really details on that in mind at this point, that's something I'd like to see, like I said, again, by the time I'm in my early 60s, is really to be making inroads on that. Talking about working with the girls day to day out at camp and sort of the minutiae of being inspired, with the legacy day to day. Something that I got involved with really right away when I started with camp in 2002 was my brother, Chris Starz, asked me if I would be up for helping him lead camp's first ever backpacking trip to Isle Royale National Park with one other counselor and 7 campers. It was a full trip of 10 of us. So that's the Park Service limit out there is 10. So it was him and I, a gal named Haley Cox, who was the counselor, and then 7 kids. And these 7 kids who were due to go on this first Isle Royale trip were longtime campers. They were 14, 15 years old, longtime campers, came from alumni families. They were all chips, as we call them at camp. And so, now if I thought of that, I'd be like, ooh, we'd really want to make a good impression. We'd really want to make sure that these kids have a great time. Right. But back then, like, I've just come home from Montana, and like a job that I had just briefly after college out there. I'm back to camp. It's sort of supposed to be an interim stop, but here I am. My brother is like in between high school and college. He's had some good training with Rocky Mountain West backpacking program that he was in a couple summers prior. So, and I went to Isle Royale as a camper with Red Arrow Camp. So I've got that background, and Haley Cox is international staff from Australia first year, right? So it's your unsuspecting group of leaders with all these alumni kids, and off we go to the Wilderness Island in Lake Superior. But we had a blast, and there are actually a couple of specific stories that I could tell from that trip that I remember to this day. Waking up in the middle of the night thinking there was a moose trampling our tent. That was wild. My brother cooking fork souffle because we decided not to do dishes. I learned from that very first evening on trail that you always do your dishes on a wilderness trip, no matter what, because you never want to deal with that the next morning.
Yeah.
But that set this foundation for me with camp. Programmatically, I've been involved in the wilderness tripping aspect of camp pretty heavily since I started in 2002. And my brother passed in 2006, and my mom and I got together, and we wanted to come up with a way that we could, continue his legacy despite his physical absence. And so we established Northpoint Adventures. I'm getting a little choked up about it. It's near and dear to my heart. And we started offering trips under the Northpoint Adventures branding or context, if you will, in 2009. I believe that one of our first trips in 2009 that went out as Northpoint Adventures was a brand new intermediate backpacking trip to Pictured Rocks. But I'm proud to say, that we've developed that program now to the point, Felicia, where we took campers to Colorado, for the first time in 2014. And we've got I believe it's our 7th Colorado trip coming up this summer. It's a sold out trip. And I get the opportunity to lead it with one of my longtime friends at camp and colleagues, Katie Singleton, who's made an incredible impact on that program. And I'm also really honored to be a part of our 20th Isle Royale trip now this summer with these girls. And it's not all about me. I want to mention that is that part of what fuels me and part of what inspires me is that summer after summer, especially in the tripping program, because that's where I'm largely directly working with the kids, is I see the confidence develop. And I see the inspiration. They're inspired by watching the group before them go out to Isle Royale. And when they're 13, they say, man, I want to do that when I'm 14 or when I'm 15 and I'm an AC.
Yeah.
And I see the campers motivating themselves.
Yeah.
Either by looking forward at the group in front of them and again, wanting to be them or, internally on a trip where you've got half of the group that's like, I'm super scared to jump in the water. I don't know what that's going to be like. I've never jumped in Lake Superior before. And then you've got the other half of the group that's like, come on, let's do it. And they're the first 4, that line up at the Daisy Farm dock to take the plunge off the end of the dock, and then you've got the other ones that are like, well, shoot, if they did it, we can do it too. And you've got the one who's like, I don't want to be the only one that didn't do it, so I'm going to do it too, and it's just those kinds of moments on those trips that, to put this all into context, some of those kinds of things happen, with kids when they go on the Sylvania trip for the first time at 11, and they go through the whole Northpoint Adventures trip progression, and there's Sylvania, there's Porky's, there's Postle Island sea kayaking and Pictured Rocks, and there's another Porky's in there that's longer, and Isle Royale, and a Voyagers trip, and a Colorado trip at the end. But you see them go through this whole progression, and you watch them grow, and that to me is really special. And then you hope that they've either by the time they've, finished the Northpoint program, if you will, that they've either developed their own set of tools, and confidences that they can go off to go seriously, go climb a mountain in Patagonia. One of our kids did that. There's another gal, Avi, who I had out on the Colorado trip. I believe it was back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And I summited the Estes Cone with her and her group. And now she's off to be a leader at I don't remember exactly the kind of program that she's doing, but she's a leader for a wilderness science-based program out in Bozeman, Montana. She just got that job and sent me a Facebook message and said, thank you. And I sent her a message back and I said, you have the skills, do it, but to be able to watch that growth as these kids go through that progression, it's sure, I take some satisfaction from being involved in that, but largely seeing them succeed and know that these young women are going on to do great things. Bam, that's awesome,
Well, I think that going back to Chris and you as brothers and your passions and your unconsciousness of what you're laying out for these young women, there's so many other things bigger and greater than all that. And I think that that's why, besides the loss of your brother, why it moves you to tears and moved me to tears. I always wanted my nieces, Claire and Lucy, to follow in my sister and my footsteps and go to Nicolet. But because they were West Coast kids, and I just think that it's an interesting thing to have observed a couple of generations of people who were, whether it was at Wayland or camp, who were like, what were my parents thinking? They, to be sent away to boarding school or to summer camp. And it's like, what are you kidding me? Like, you're going to give your kid like the biggest, foot up on the situation, no matter what other life things they go through. And this is to my point. Andrea, my sister, actually was on some summer holiday with the girls, showing them different points from Madison to Eagle River, what had been influences on her life from the time they were, in our childhood and young adult life, and ended up back at Nicolet while Chris was still alive. Chris had taken them out. I think it was water skiing. Right. To this day, they have this impression of Chris. And it had to have been within a year or so of his passing. And to have been given that gift and had that camp. And then ironically, both of my nieces are both very much nature lovers. My eldest niece, Claire, is in law school for environmental law. Like, you would love these girls. Like, I can't even tell you. They're now 21 and going to be 25. You would love them. Like, I think we have a love for each other. Mm-hmm. And when I think about the paying forward, I think about when I was a counselor at camp, but when I was a camper, I did have a lot of fear. I had there was a part of me that was like, come on, let's go. And there was a part of me that was very shy and like, I can't do that. Like jumping off the edge of a cliff, that's not for Felicia and Linsky. But, leading a pack in another way, people would be like, oh, look to Felicia. She'll be the one, and there was always a sense of self-consciousness. And I think some of it came from what was applied on me, not that came from within. And so when you start getting these outer influences, this is why environment is so important. Because if you're in the right environment, that people will give you the ability to be your truth and the ability to shine and the ability to fly, you are unstoppable. And that's where confidence and fearlessness comes into play. I know for a fact that when I had the opportunity to come back to camp as a camp counselor, it was my conscious, unconscious mission to make fearless young girls.
Mm.
And to make them unstoppable, and to go through that camp experience like a family unit that was not to be stopped, in the most kind, loving, communicative sort of way, because I was going to give them everything I could give them, knowing what I had already learned by the age 18, that no matter what life faced you off with, you were going to get back up and you were going to be able to do whatever life threw you. And by the time I came back to camp, ironically, while my parents were going through their divorce, this was April of 76, I was climbing the Appalachian Mountains in Georgia, doing an expedition. That was my first expedition that was led by a YMCA, like just, outing. I don't even know that my parents really realized like what we were doing. Like it was me and a handful of kids with 2 counselors taking a road trip from Rockville, Illinois to Georgia to like, what? I mean, are you like really what? But I think they were so caught up in their own minutia that they didn't really put together. But what it did for me was it gave me so much confidence. And what led up to that part of that confidence was my camp experiences, those day trips we took, those outings we took, building campfires, packing a pack and knowing that you could go out and you could fuel yourself, you could canoe across a river, you could portage a canoe, you could build a campfire, you could cook, you could sleep on the ground under the stars, you could wake up the next day and know how to pack yourself up and as a unit get from point A to point B and do it collectively together because that was your responsibility. And going forward as a counselor at camp, every day trip, I remember specifically like standing up for the kind of day trips that I was going to get the girls or the overnights, because I wanted these city girls to be like, I'm getting that dirt under your nails and you're going to learn what strength is. And I will never forget. I don't remember where we were for this overnight, but I remember all the girls were on their cycle. And I remember specifically saying to them, we will make sure everything is strung up. We will make sure everything is contained, because I'm going to guarantee you right now that there's going to be a bear that comes into our campsite and everybody will stay in their tent and I will do all the talking, and do not leave. Do not act out of fear. I have this. I promise you. We will get through this. And I'll be damned. That's exactly what happened. A bear came into our site, our campsite, and I talked the whole thing through. I don't even know where I got the strength to do that. And it was just one of those moments in time that was like, even Jeremy sharing these kinds of things with you makes me realize I don't care who tries to take me down. And God knows plenty people have, and plenty people still are trying. And I have to hear myself and go, that's not happening.
I think it's very powerful when you can visualize talking the bear out of your campsite, metaphorically speaking. If someone challenging comes your way, just talk to that bear and tell them to get gone.
That's right. And that's why when you were describing the young women going through Northpoint and now they're climbing, these mountains, because I continue to do expeditions. I continue to do portaging up in Canada. I took myself for my 21st birthday to the Apostle Islands because I loved it so much from the influences from camp. Yeah. Because I needed to be in nature and build my own fire bowl and drink that fresh water and have that fresh air and those stars under the sky. And I needed to be in the earth. To this day, even in my yard, I need to get on my hands and knees and put my hands in the dirt. Every time my husband says, aren't you going to put gloves on? I'm like, are you kidding me? I want to feel the soil. I want to be one with nature. I go outside and I look up at the stars and I'm trying to find the Big Dipper, that's because of camp. Camp had such a foundational influence on me And I hope, and it's ironic that you said, because like you, I don't have children. Little did I know that those years between 18 and 23 was actually going to be when I became a mother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it chokes me up because I had pregnancies, but my pregnancies didn't manifest into full humans. And to this day, I'm very, very, very thankful that those now women in their now early 50s are still in my life, and how much influence and inspiration I supposedly gave them that I had no idea. Because you and I both know each and every person that comes through camp as a camp counselor or a person who works on the property comes with all different skill sets, all different life experiences, all different levels of commitment. You hope to God that you've hired people who are showing up 1,000%, but we're all individuals, period, the end. I didn't know what I was capable of doing. I didn't know if I was capable of putting together a curriculum to teach life-saving classes or become a competition boat driver with the American Water Ski Association and drive people up to the point where I'm trick driving and I can pull a skier, because I could hear the motor, not even know what the speedometer was, or that I could represent the USTA in tennis, or that I could, every year win a kid the horseback riding competition costume class because of how I showed up creating. None of that I knew was going to happen. None of that. But what it did for me was it actually made me a mother. And it showed me what was possible. And there's been a lot of life experiences that have since occurred. I've survived domestic violence. I've survived 4 bouts of thyroid cancer. I've had highs and lows in my career. I've walked into trailers where people are like, you're too much. You're too smart. You're too talented. You speak too well. You carry yourself too well. They don't want that. And I'm like, what are you talking about right now? Would you say to your child, dim your light, or don't rise to the occasion? It's shocking to me, but it's life. It's life. It's not a woe me victimy thing. No, it's life. And you just go, all right, next, keep swimming, get across that lake. You got this. You can do this. And go ahead.
Yeah, something, Felicia, that I think is really cool. And I'm thinking back to this microcosm of, you being a mom, between the ages of 18 and 23 to these kids. I think of my time at Red Arrow Camp, and I think of the counselors that I had. And I think something that's really special about being a camp counselor is that you get to live in that role in the mind of the camper forever. Yes. So in that way, you will always be their mom, whether they had you when you were a counselor at 19 or at 22, you will always be that person in their mind.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying about the challenges of having your own family. And I've had my own challenges, mainly because of my career choices and different things that I've gotten myself involved in. I've prioritized being involved with camp or being involved in other creative endeavors like the public radio station, or I tried to develop my own internet radio station back in 2007, but I've chosen other things other than having my own family, developing my own family. So I guess that's been self-inflicted, if you will, in my case. But to your point is about being a mom and how that's special. I'm glad, that you had that opportunity to be with those kids during that time. And I love the notion that they will always think of you as their mom, during the summer of 1981, or something like that.
I just literally, I'm in business with one of them, ironically, in our athleisure business. Another one I just had lunch with from my first cabin. I just had lunch or breakfast with at the Four Seasons last Sunday because she's out in LA. And I thank God for social media, because clearly when I was at camp, computer age was not even breaking. I mean, I graduated from college, and I remember after pre-med fine arts film school, you know, I went to beauty school so I wouldn't be a starving artist, because I couldn't continue pre-med school because of economics. Film school, I realized that as a woman directing, that wasn't going to be an opportunity handed to me. I had to pay back my school loans, and I couldn't be a starving artist. And I had a following of a lot of young college men who were asking me to cut their hair. And I was like, the writing's on the wall. Go get this license so you can get into this entertainment industry. How, I don't know. And go make that happen. Long story short, you know, this process of being able to formulate these ideas and ebb and shift and recreate, and all comes back to me, the foundation of places like camp. Camp to me was, and it's not about living in the past. I want to be very clear about that, because I think you get this. It's not about living in the past, like with your grandparents, your grandfather talking about Winnie the Pooh and telling stories and your German heritage and the food that you ate, or being raised by them during the months of January, March, or when you and Chris first started North Point. Now it's about the ability to kind of step back, like being in an art museum and being able to look at a piece of art and being able to view it from a bigger, greater scope. And to know that all of these elements that went into creating this masterpiece just doesn't happen in one fell swoop. That's hours and hours or days and years of collectiveness that comes into this making love to this element. What I know for myself is the amount of things that I was taught in my own inner strength comes from those summers at camp, without a doubt. And then being given the opportunity to be purely myself, to show up just as I am, Felicia. And that's what you guys provided. You accepted us for who we were, just as we were. Thank you so much for joining me with my conversation with Jeremy Starz, and I look forward to you returning next week, April 18th, when the part 2 of this conversation drops. And I look forward to you listening in on It's Raining Men series for over April and May's conversations with my featured male guests, all who are superb in what they do, rewarded for what they do, and are inspiring and entertaining, and are sweet, sweet, sweet men. So I look forward to you joining me and sitting down around the campfire and joining us in our wonderful, authentic conversations that pull back the curtains about these individuals and what makes them tick and what is their heart. I look forward to you joining me. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Join, listen, subscribe, and share. Much, much love.
There was a quote that really helped me 7 years ago or so, and I'll just kind of leave it at the quote, but the quote is live light, travel light, spread the light, be the light. And I really like that one.
Oh, I'm so excited for you to join us on part 2 of my conversation with Jeremy Starz. This week dropping will be the wrap up of our conversation where we continue to talk about passion and purpose in life, family and business, and doing what we feel is our truth and what's authentic to us. I look forward to you joining us and sitting down at this next hour of conversation, and look forward to hearing what you think. Thank you for joining. Hold your seat. Here we come.
Something that's really important to me, Felicia, and I thought of this, sort of 15 minutes ago when we first kind of went down this road. Something you said triggered this in me, but I realized that at camp and on trips and really in life in general, going beyond camp, something that I really like to do for people is I like to, if someone else and I are having an interaction, something that I like to do is create a space where they can just sort of take off and be themselves. I like that generally because I think it lends to authenticity, and something that, although I can put on a heck of a radio show, and act like DJ guy, the DJ guy that I always wanted to be, when I was in college or, high school, working part-time in it. I like authenticity, and I like authentic interactions with people. And it's really important to me, on a trip where you can create the atmosphere in the trip group, and you can do this through intentional leadership to a point where everyone has a chance to weigh in on the dynamic. What does that look like? Again, maybe there's a timid camper that doesn't want to try the jambalaya because it's too spicy. Mm-hmm. Instead of being the counselor that's like, just eat it, mm-hmm. or you got to eat, you don't have a choice, all mm-hmm. that. Something my brother and I did is we'd make it fun. We'd play it up and we'd be like, all right, so south of the spice line, tonight's meal is, and if you've never had jambalaya before, it's really going to be fantastic. We did our best not to alienate people because of their fears. That's the point. And I guess in life in general, something that has served me well, and other times it's bitten me a little bit, but I think it serves me well more often than not, is when you give people the benefit of the doubt when you're having a conversation and you try to hear what they're saying. If there's nothing more important here than just hearing what someone has to say and trying to understand where they're coming from. Yeah. And I think that's something that just as we grow as human beings, as we go through this adventure in life, is being open to where someone else is coming from, I think is just so important. And camp has helped me realize that, but I think going through some of my own personal challenges in my early 30s especially helped me realize that you don't come down on somebody because they're afraid of something, and you don't discount someone's ideals or their philosophies because they're not yours. Instead try to hear who they are and try to, understand where they're coming from, and, listen for certain words. Are they feeling included, by the group, or, accepted in the interaction, things like that. And I guess where I was going with all that is that something at camp that I try to create in camp with our programming, and that's admittedly more challenging because it involves more people. There are more moving parts. You can't be directly involved in every single activity period that's happening across camp in any given hour. But where I really enjoy, being able to supervise that, if you will, or facilitate that, that's probably the better word, is on wilderness trips where it's small group stuff. Because I really organically believe that, creating open atmospheres where people are being heard, where people are weighing in, where people are being understood, is just so important, especially in the wilderness context where, like you said, you've got a group of people with the bear coming into the campsite, and how are you going to manage that?
Well, I think also what you're leading up to is you're talking about the ability to really stay open-minded, stay open-hearted, that you realize that connection and communication are key.
Yeah.
That the ability to be authentic is something that we should all strive for ultimately. The reason for my creating this platform, I wanted to create this platform 6 years ago. I wanted to start a podcast when people weren't doing podcasts.
Yeah.
And I reached out to a friend of mine and I said, we've got to do this thing called a podcast. He was like, what is a podcast?
Yeah.
And I said, well, imagine like having your own radio show that you get to produce in your own terms, at your own time, however you choose. And you just get to be you doing whatever it is you want to talk about. And the reason why I wanted to do it with him at the time was because we had this great stream of consciousness conversation that I thought, God, if I was a fly on the wall, I'd want to hear that conversation. I said, come on, let's record ourselves and see what we think. And we did. And we went, oh yeah, no, that's not happening. And we laughed at ourselves and went on. And then life happens as it did. My mom got sick. I was working 80 hours a week on films and life happened. And then the pandemic hit and people started looking at themselves, their purpose, what's important, what's their value, what are they here for? What matters? Many things that I've thought of throughout my whole life, but now the world was on the same vibration. And it was all those challenges. And I found myself like raising up a lot of people, creating meditation groups, trying to solve the problem. Everything's been about solving the problem. Everything's figure outable. What can you do to help here,
Yeah,
here.
Totally.
And for me, one I think of my strengths is the ability to listen. Yes, of course, I have a lot to say. Nobody's gonna fault me for that. But where I have been faulted for that is in environments where it's too much for people who can't handle it. And maybe I chose incorrectly in my space that I chose to, draw my strengths. Or maybe I've learned from that and now I'm past that. Or maybe it's just where I'm just, building up what my next chapter is. But whatever that is, when all the arrows started pointing back to me launching this podcast, and I started formulating these ideas, and it wasn't the idea of a podcast. It was more like, how does Felicia take all of her life experiences, people telling me to write books, trying to be the authentic Felicia that I love to be, just like I am in front of you right now on Zoom, being able to hear you, because I was always curious about what makes people tick. What drives you? What things are you passionate about? Sitting around, breaking bread together, having a great conversation, a great connection, learning about somebody else that really matters, not a celebrity that's on a red carpet who's been put together by a whole team of people that don't even get credit for what they bring to the table, but for that one human being. And don't get me wrong, I love the work that I've been a part of and continue to be a part of and treasure it. And that has been a very big part of my life. But there's so many interesting stories to be told. There's so many interesting, vibrant human beings out there. And I think of humankind as the greatest bank account we have. We're the greatest source to each other by just slowing down and connecting. And so when all the arrows started pointing at this, initially it was Camp Fifi was the name. Not even a podcast was in the idea sphere. But Camp Fifi came up through a coach of mine where we were coming up with names. And I even posted this thing called Camp Fifi coming soon, because I knew that environment was all about raising up, inspiring, empowering, all the things that I love to do, whether I'm putting makeup on your face or cutting hair or giving you a spray tan, which sounds so shallow and it's so not. Like, I'm so much deeper than that. And so then when I start to bring my depth to the table, or when somebody's in my chair, if somebody starts hearing that shit, they're like, excuse me, because I don't mean shit, but I mean in the sense that they start hearing me like wanting to talk about 12 different subjects. It's just too much for people. She's just gone from politics to art to cello playing to, what was that great meal you had, to like making love to, and they're just like, what has just happened? And I'm like, welcome to my brain. I'm here to live. This is how full and rich I choose to be. Aren't you too?
Isn't that a wonderfully rich way to live though, Felicia? It is.
I mean, how else
so
is there
wonderful.
To live? So this is my point. So I'm like, I gotta find my people. How am I gonna make that happen? So when the arrows started pointing to this podcast platform becoming now Camp Fifi, and now more people are coming in going, you of all people have got to have a podcast. You have got to do what you do, authentically being you. I was like, well, I've got to bring in guests. So not only I can share my stories, but we together can share our stories, and how that all beautifully blends like a 7-course meal. And so hence the name Camp Fifi Uncensored, because there isn't anything, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, I won't talk about. And joining me around the campfire, where we'll talk about everything from soup to nuts, or what I like to say, from cannolis to egg in the holes, and don't forget the s'mores, and where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are vast. And that is why you guys play such an integral part, your family lineage, you, Jeremy, you as a baby. I just remember you as a little boy, a boy, and Chris being born too. And yet when I sit here with you, I don't feel like we're a different age. I feel like all we're doing is like going, oh my God, how much are we really family? I'm madly in love with you. I'm madly in love with your family. I realize how much we can help each other. Right. I realize, and this is what I want people to hear when they hear these stories shared, is who can I connect with? Who can I serve? Who can I raise up? Who can I inspire and empower? Where is it right outside my front door? Is it around the corner? Is it at my church? Is it in my school? Is it in my workplace? Who can I connect with? Who am I listening? Mm-hmm. Am I sharing?
And I think it's interesting, Felicia, because not every challenge, say, that you or I individually have experienced, and that we might be sharing collectively, not every challenge might resonate with every single person that's out there. Because something that came to mind, I think I presented this to camp in a final banquet speech or something like that, maybe a couple years ago or a few years ago. But I served up the metaphor that, we're all sort of climbing the same mountain in life, mm-hmm. but we're coming at it from different angles. When metaphorically you think about coming at it from different angles, we're all hiking different trails, right? And there are different features of those trails, different challenges and so forth. And, maybe say my bout with adult anxiety 7 years ago, and learning my way through that might not be the same challenge that, say, somebody who has survived domestic violence, different lessons or different things that they've taken from that, But I really appreciate your point about humankind, and the most valuable bank account, if you will, is sort of all of our collective adventures and our collective knowledge. But to me, here at 42, I think that's the greatest gift from either watching my mother deal with adversity within the business, dealing with either some of my own personal challenges, or just, finding one's way as a young adult, watching my grandparents who, thought camp was pretty much buttoned up and passed on to the next generation after 30 years of their direct involvement, them having to come out of retirement and sell their retirement home to carry the business on, during difficult times for Camp Nicolet in the 80s. Like I've seen all of that, and I realized that the greatest gift that we can give to one another is just to be there for each other. Even if my story doesn't resonate with, person A, B, C, or D, is to still just, again, create that atmosphere of space, that's non-judgmental, where people can be authentic about things, and to just do our best to listen to one another, and in that way support each other through this life's adventure. I don't know what it is, but the day that my brother died, and I haven't shared this with very many people, but the day that my brother died, I feel like I sort of heard his words, in my head. And when I found out that he had passed away in a car accident, I almost immediately heard in my head, keep going no matter what. Keep going no matter what. And I feel like, no matter what a person is going through, no matter what challenges we're facing, to just be there for one another, and to keep going, despite it being, a pandemic, or a misunderstanding. That's the crazy part about life, is that challenges can be as minuscule as a misunderstanding that you have with your partner when you get up in the morning, to the global pandemic, or worse.
Yes.
And I feel like if you can approach each day with at least creating that space for one another, and that understanding that to me at 42, with life half over, at least that's my perspective, that's the greatest gift that we can give to one another, is just being there for each other.
Agreed. And you do have to have willing parties. Let's add that.
That's true.
You can show up completely prepared to be that open-hearted human being, but you may not be facing other people who want to play in that arena with you.
You're right. You're exactly right.
And that's a big, big life lesson that constantly keeps showing up. And it's not like a lesson that you don't feel like you've learned, because when you are throwing all different elements into that mix, you have no control over people, places, and things.
Nope.
You can only show up being the best version of yourself and hoping for the best outcome. But, if people are going to be threatened because you're such a beautiful heart, or because of the collective of who and what you bring to the table, then, you have to make a decision. And it's like everything in life. You have to make decisions how you want to show up in these environments. And then you have to make decisions to assess if this is a good and healthy environment for you, and if you can bring value to this environment or not. And if not there, where can you? Mm-hmm. And I think life is an evolution that way. I mean, it's kind of like when I go into meditation. This is going to be crazy when you hear this. I always end up back on those paths back at camp. Mm-hmm. I can see the path from like Hemlock and Chalet going past your house.
Mm-hmm. The lake path or the road? The
lake path.
Yeah.
The
through
lake
the
path.
Pioneer Unit and past Lakewood.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. And I, continue that way. And it's, and then I'm guided by my dogs. My one particular dog is a guided angel. And, there's different things, and it allows me to hear, because being a sensitive soul that I am, I think that we all are, is our willingness to be open and vulnerable to sharing that, though. That does not make me weaker. No. That makes me more in tune. That makes me more sensitive, so I can heal not only myself, but others. That's what I'm here to do, by being able to be open and share these very raw conversations, and give people the space to feel at ease to do the same. That's my strength. That's my quiet strength, though I just said it out loud. and be able to, say, it's not easy to walk into rooms. And you might have been with people, and this goes back to camp, the learning to live together. The sad truth, Jeremy, and I'm bouncing around a little bit. The sad truth is most people are never taught that. They're never taught that very valuable statement, learning to live together. Most people are never given the opportunity outside their bloodline, and then those who they line up with, be it in partnership, whether it's work or intimacy, ever learn the skill set of what that takes to manage that harmony, to okay, now we're faced with a challenge. How are we going to get through that so we can get to the place of we solved that problem, we did that successfully, and that's part of learning to live together. I'm in environments where some call it the circus, other people, think it's a glamorous environment, but it's always changing. You're always being reintroduced or introduced to new people. You're always having to learn how to work together, to hear each other, to solve a problem, to make this form of art that's called entertainment. And it's different depending upon who's come from what environment, whose skill set is such, whose communications are or aren't. And you don't know any of that. Zero. And yet you're supposed to respect, you're supposed to trust, you're supposed to deliver value, and you're supposed to get to the other side so people can make a ton of money off of your hard-earned efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts within your own immediate camps. And it's fascinating right now to me what, not only myself, but a lot of my peers are witnessing who have more seasoning behind them, so to speak. And just shifts always happen. We all know this. Who and what we experience at age 7 versus 17 versus 37 versus from there on forward shifts. There's only 2 things that are inevitable: death and change.
Mm-hmm.
You can count on it. Period. The end. But with change, go ahead. What were you going to say? You were about to say something.
I was just going to say, what you just described, and I assume it's sort of project to project, maybe in the entertainment industry, different teams, different compositions of teams. That environment that you just described is actually, and maybe this is a cool tie back, Felicia, but it describes to a T what we go through season after season with camp. Every year you're hoping for the same outcomes, right? And you want to hit a certain level of quality and, standard in your programming. But every single year you're at the same mercy, or you're at the mercy of a different group of people. Like you said before, it's different personalities. People are bringing different skill sets to the table. People's level of communication is different. People are at different places in life. So we're all, we're sort of working against that similar challenge, just in different industries. And I'm sure there's a ton of other industries out there too, where people feel that same pressure, that you're working towards a consistent product, but you're working with, and this isn't in a bad way, you're working with inconsistent pieces, year to year. Football is another, I don't know if you're a sports fan, but football is exactly the same. You hope to win the Super Bowl every year, but guess what, coach? You get to do it with a different group of people every time.
That's right. But the thing that I'm so grateful for camp, and this is to my point, not everybody, unless you're in a formulation of a team playing sport or in an environment like the military, mm-hmm. or places where you have to get from point A to point B together as safely and all alive. And I do go back to camp. The learning to live together motto was the foundation to everything. When I walk into a trailer in Hollywood, I know I can feel it, smell it, hear it. I know who is a team player and who isn't, mm-hmm. like that. And I'll tell you, even though I can ebb and flow and I can very harmoniously bring people and personalities together, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always happen. It's all energy source. It's not for a lack of desire. There's just some people who just, they're oil to water. Mm-hmm. And that's not a negative. That's just being able to read the room. Mm-hmm. And that's where, you walk in completely hopeful and excited and, ready to go and game on and so forth. But you may not be everybody's cup of tea sometimes too.
No, that's exactly right. And I've felt that in camp. I have not been on the same page with numerous employees over the course of 21 years, you can imagine. For the most part, I, again, in coming into the camp environment, at least with that philosophy of creating an open space and trying to listen to people as much as possible, that's been successful for the most part. But there are times when, people come in with their own agendas, and let's face it, under the surface, as a business owner, I have an agenda too. My agenda is to serve the families who have signed their kids up for camp and have paid money, for them to have a quality experience. My agenda is also safety, and my agenda are my own standards of quality, say in a trip or in a special event or in, how a final banquet was or was capture the flag fun for people. Again, I get into the minutiae sometimes, but you're right. There are people, and I believe a camp consultant, a great guy named Steve McGuire, once said to me, he said, 4% of people, Jer, aren't going to like you. You need to just be comfortable with that. I don't know where he got that percentage from, but he said 4% are not going to like you. Get over it, deal with it. That's how it's going to be. And trust me, I've had a sampling of that 4% in 20 years, and I get that, and I understand it. And it doesn't always feel good at times, but at least in the camp environment, and I suppose in the entertainment industry too, where it's probably project based, and projects come and projects go. At least with camp, you do your best with the people that you don't get on super well with to, get through to the end. That becomes the goal, really, is instead of parting ways or having these big, splits and drama and try to avoid that as much as possible. And
right.
You do your best to try to live with them, they're doing their best to try to live with me, know, and you get to, August 10th or whatever the magic end day is, and you say, thank you, and they're like, thank you, and that's it. And you probably don't work together again the next season, but so it goes. And the thing that I always give everybody credit for, in a positive way, is that I, as the employer, I give myself credit for trying to, again, work with those people and understand where they're coming from. And I always give the employee who maybe came to camp thinking that it was going to be the best summer of their life, and it wasn't. I give them a lot of credit for sticking it out, and I try to walk away from those situations, seeing the good things that people did on both sides. Now, when you sit in end of season, debrief meetings and you talk about the stuff that went down, no, are you always talking about the good stuff that happened with the people that you didn't get on with? No, typically not. But, a year later or a year and a half later, after you've had some time to let the sediment in the glass of water settle, it's all good, because we're all humans and we all make mistakes and life's not perfect. So, right. I mean, that's talk about a organic, uncensored little chunk of camp life right there is, stuff doesn't always work out very well. Yeah.
It's interesting. I just had an interview on one of my podcasts with a very successful makeup artist. And, being that entertainment is, when your audience sees things, they see the finished product, and then they either fall in love with the subject matter and they follow and they, eat it up salaciously and, want to know all the things from all the angles and who are they and how are they and are they kind and this and the other. And what people don't see and may not understand and may not know, some people are going to have great experiences from that masterful piece that's been created. And other people are going to have other stories behind that, what was made to look, like the biggest and the best thing. And I think that that's to the point of what life is. Life isn't always a bowl of, chocolate. If you like chocolate, God knows, I would love it to be one big spread of, delicious bagels and lox and cannolis and pizza and, bring it on and just keep, laughing and talking and going. Unfortunately, I know that, and what I love about this platform is you do get to engage with individuals where you realize, and I know this going into it, but where you get to have this connection where people realize that they're not alone, no matter what angle what their life path is, that we all have similar stories. We're all made up of the same thing. We all have connection. It's ironic because you work in nature. Our hemisphere, our planets, our teachers. I'm not talking about astrology and numerology. I'm just talking about, man, planets are constantly moving, but they're also working in harmony. We as human beings are energy that must find a way to work in harmony. I'm a problem solver that wants to create harmonious environments. I certainly know I did that at camp. And I certainly know that I tried to do that as a child in my household. And I know that I try to do that everywhere I go forward. And when I'm not understood, it affects me. When my good intentions are not understood, I either have to go, okay, move on, or how else can I come through the door? But I've also come to realize that I'm not, like you said, you're not going to be 4% of the ones that want you around for whatever the reasons, but it's a big world. And people like you and I are unstoppable. And what I think that camp created was the sense of we are unstoppable for the good of all. And that we have the strength within us to endure, to live, to create, to be, to soar, to rise to the occasion. And I think that your grandparents were the example of that. I think your parents have been the example of that. None of us are perfect. We're all flawed. We all have our stories.
Yep.
We all have value. We all need to be loved and appreciated. The flower doesn't grow without being watered.
Right.
The child does not become a powerful contributor to life without being raised in a manner and in environments that are safe and nurturing. And camp is a perfect example of what you and your family have done for decades now. And it's really, really powerful. And I hope that you can take that in, how I'm speaking on behalf of many, many people who are thankful to you and your family.
You know, it's really meaningful to Mom and I know it would be meaningful to my grandparents too, and my brother if they were here with us. And I know it's meaningful to my dad too, for his 18 years, I believe, that he spent at camp running it with my mom from, I believe it was 1971 through 1983 or so. It's really meaningful for us to hear that, Felicia. Thank you very much. It's really affirming, especially coming off of a couple years with the pandemic, where basically all of the routine things that we would do with camp, you know, going from staff recruiting to program development to, you know, feeling fiscally sound in the business and all those things. Never in a million years would I have thought that the pandemic would have taken all those things and just kind of thrown them up in the air, you know, like a deck of cards. And here we are now in spring of 2022 with various cards, you know, falling nicely back into place. Like enrollment's really good for camp right now, and we're grateful for that. Other cards, you know, falling a little out of where they used to fall. For example, I just got back from University of Wisconsin River Falls yesterday. We did a staff recruiting event. If it were 2015, probably would have talked to 25 or 30 people. It's 2022, so I talked to 6. You know, that's a reality of the employee recruiting scene right now. Luckily, we have a wonderful camp director who works alongside Mom and I. Mom's semi-retired, so Leah gets the pleasure of my management company more than she gets Mom's. But Leah Wall is our camp director. She's a 5-year employee of Camp Nicolet. She was the Northpoint Adventures director for a handful of years, and she's been doing an absolutely superb job with hiring staff for 2022. And we've got a great team coming together despite, you know, the changes of the pandemic. but yeah, no, it's affirming to hear that it means so much to so many people. It's largely back to what we were talking about before, largely why I want to make sure there's a plan in place for the sustainability of Camp Nicolet beyond third generation ownership. I may not have all the answers on what that specifically looks like right now, but it's on my mind, almost every day. It's camp is the kind of place that I'm just really honored that it's given so many good and different experiences to so many, different people. And it's taught us all so many lessons, by being a part of it and experiencing everything from Wednesday cookouts to being in the water ski show to dressing up like, I want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but did you not win an award for Kermit and Miss Piggy in the horse show in the costume contest?
100%.
Yes, I remember that from not only being small and watching my favorite part of the Camp Nicolet horse show, which was the costume contest, but also sort of being the camp motion picture archivist that I am. And I like going back and watching those old films, either the 16 millimeters that my grandfather took or the Super 8 millimeters that my mom made, or the VHS tapes, or it reminds me, I've got a camp video for 2021 still to release to our families. But I'm really grateful that it means so much to so many people. And something that I think is important too is that for me personally, camp has posed numerous challenges to me through the years. Things ranging from having to or choosing to release employees to even last summer coordinating the replacement of a water main underneath the sports field without destroying everything, to again, the evolution of employees and the team from year to year. It's posed many challenges to me, both cognitive challenges, but also physical challenges in working on the facility, and how to overcome. I think that's, again, let's go back to some roots here, watching my mother's resiliency and her dedication, and working off of a firm and, level-headed foundation, a stable foundation that my grandparents established, being given the opportunity to go away to boys camp myself, to Red Arrow Camp, where program is steeped deeply in tradition, and you're really not allowed to slack off, because it helps you, by being invested and by being engaged. Mm-hmm. It helps you discover your own confidences. And going out to Isle Royale for the first time when I was 13 years old and hiking 35 miles or whatever it was that we did out there, having all those opportunities, and then being able to be involved in our family business, and accept the challenges that come forth every year, and being able to overcome those, and through all of those experiences, to be able to just be there for other people, and put your arm around somebody else if it's appropriate, and to say, hey, you know what, you can get through this too.
Yeah,
you're experiencing something hard in life, but you can get through this too.
Yeah,
because we've all had our stuff.
Yeah,
and you can get through this too. And we are here for you. We as a humankind are here for you.
Well, that is so relevant, because because thanks to your parents, and I don't know how this has been going forward, but in the 5 years that I was at camp, the first 2 summers I had the same cabin of girls.
Yeah.
And the last 3 summers I had the same cabin of girls. And that was certainly out of an unusual circumstance at the time. I know, at least I remember. But what it allowed for was a deeper connection and a fluidity that was able to build upon. I don't think that is something that everybody wanted. I think it just worked within the realm of what was happening with the cabins of girls at the time. But what it allowed for was, from the first summer when Jamie Canarish Bicus and I won the Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog, to the second summer, which she wasn't my camper, by the way. She became my camper in my cabin. But my girls from the first summer to the second summer, one came back and she all of a sudden found out she was diabetic. One came back and her parents had divorced. And it was about how did I show up and support and bring strength and a collectiveness. We're all in this together and we're all going to get through this together. Mm-hmm. And that this is the kinds of things that we get faced with: health, death, parents splitting up, economic struggles, things that we just don't see happening, but it happens like a flip of a switch. We're talking during a time that our world right now is not only trying to recover through a pandemic and how people are looking at their life and how they want to go forward, and how do you then as an employer, staff up because people are looking at things differently, what their value, what they're going to do, how they want to show up being, all those things, social media, and we've got wars going on right now. And so then you look at your own little unit and go, God, what am I blessed with versus, being in a very bigger perspective sort of a way. And how do we teach going forward how to value our life, how to value one another? How do we bring forward what matters and not talking about it? You gotta be willing to have these conversations. Yep. Because not everything is like a pretty tied up in a pink bow.
Yeah. And I think that's really poignant, for discussion on, okay, so we've lived to this point and we've, developed these tools and we've helped one another out as we're given the opportunity. But yeah, some forward thinking I think is important too. And, what is important going forward? What's meaningful to oneself and, what's meaningful to your community. I'm kind of zooming out now as I'm talking about this, and what's meaningful to us as humans. And it's really interesting in this life, you're only given the opportunity to be in control of so many things. Your sphere of control, if you will, only branches out so far. And I think that's where it becomes, as we go forward and as we want certain things for ourselves, be it a healthier environment to live in, or, not ruining our planet. People have been talking about that since I was 4 years old, whatever. But even, in the broader context of countries invading one another, and things like that, I think that's where it's important to step back and look at this and say, is that really what we want for ourselves going forward? And or do we want to try to create an atmosphere of peace where we can at least work to understand our differences, and I realize these are idealistic things, but in my mind, and call me sheltered or whatever, but in my mind, really what we create is all up to us. It gets back sort of where we started. When you put your grubby clothes on after school and you head out into the woods, in the springtime at Camp Nicolet, what do you create? Are you going to go make a fort? Are you going to go play with the bulldozers in the woods and make roads? Are you going to go play with the dogs? What are you going to do? And I think as an adult, as adults, we have that same opportunity to create what we want, for ourselves. And it's where that forward thinking piece, I think, comes in. What do we really want?
Yeah. And I think it's about learning that we do have choices, that we have healthy choices versus self-destructive choices.
Yeah, for sure.
And that this is how, teaching doesn't stop in your formula of the years of education. Teaching is, how are we teaching one another just in this conversation? How in our exchange are we opening up our brains to where we get off the Zoom call, that it's going to have that rock in the water ripple effect? How tomorrow or a month from now, this conversation is going to resonate with both of us and whomever hears it, and how you go out into the world and make an impact, a positive impact? How do you help the next person? How do you reach down or up or across and you reach your hand out and say, how can I support you? How can I help you? How can I not destroy you? How can I serve you?
Mm-hmm. How can we be together?
Correct. Harmoniously, in a healthy, supportive way. I don't have to agree with you, but we can still walk this walk together. We can do it in silence if you want, but we can still get from point A to point B and to look in each other's eyes and go, we did that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, if we were able to circle back and go, okay, your grandparents were here listening to this conversation, what do you think they would say?
It's hard for me to answer this, Felicia, because I'm kind of like my mom in that it's going to sound counterintuitive because I like my radio show and I like being sort of the center of attention for 3 hours playing music that hopefully not a lot of people have heard. But Mom and I are alike, I guess, in the way that we don't handle, accolades very, very well, perhaps. But anyway, you asked me that question, and the reason I paused is because it's taking me a while to get to saying, if my grandparents heard this conversation, I think they'd say, we're proud of you. We're really proud of what you've done. And I think they would go on to say, we're also extremely proud of your mother. We love her very much. And, we miss Chris and we love him too. And I guess that's really powerful for me because, again, I don't always handle compliments very well. And it's neat to have arrived at a point through discussing these things that I believe that they would say that. And I really do believe that they would say that. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God. The little 11-year-old Felicia never, imagine these kinds of things, probably, like always wanting to make an impact. I just didn't know how. But having this conversation, I knew I look forward to connecting with you, but I don't know how these organic conversations are going to happen.
Nope.
You're
just taking a risk every time you set these up.
Every time. And every time, people, this is our conversation, but every conversation, and I hope this is not about me. I hope it's just because I give a space where people can just be themselves.
Yeah.
And they feel safe and they feel loved, because that's what I like to provide, is where people feel safe and they feel loved.
You do a good job. Really good job.
Well, I love you so much. I think that this has been quite a joy. I think that you have shared a really heartfelt reason why you're successful. I think that any parent or young girl that has the opportunity to explore and be a part of this legacy that your family's created, Camp Nicolet for Girls in Eagle River, Wisconsin. If they have the opportunity to look it up, check it out, be a part of it, dip their little toe, their big toe, their whole body into Lake Franklin, they are some of the luckiest people on the planet. I remember every parents' weekend, parents being like, why aren't I spending the summer here? Exactly.
They still say that, Felicia.
I don't doubt it. Every summer comes along and I'm like, why aren't I there doing this? This is my, if you heard my head, every summer I'm like, why aren't I just going back and being a counselor? Why aren't I just helping do something there? That is not a statement, by the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I feel your love, and thank you for loving me. I love you as well. And I really appreciate, again, having that perspective of, what camp was like for you during a time that I don't really recall, because I was pretty young. I mean, I have glimpses, and so it's really awesome for me to understand, what camp felt like then, and it helps guide me, as one of the current managers and owners of the camp. It helps guide me with context, so that we can keep camp going in a direction, that continues to be meaningful and formative and, positive, although it's not perfect, for people as we go forward. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And listen, remember, you can't control every young girl's experience, because it's all about who they're, who's in their cabin, who their counselors are, what their fears are, what their baggage is, there's just so many things that that's not the responsibility. The responsibility you hold is providing a space,
yes,
that they are safe, that they do have these opportunities, that this is a period of time that they get to discover who they are and what they love. And it may be one or many things. They may just love people. They may love horseback riding. They just may love, picking up leaves, or discovering things like they love, sitting under the stars, or they just may love canteen. I mean, who's to say?
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with canteen and
God knows
rest hour and lunch and right, and bug juice and ripping your jeans because you tripped and fell in the dirt. I mean, life's not perfect, and it's those little things that you latch onto. I mean, it may be water skiing and horseback riding that we heavily promote, but man, getting filthy on a cookout and your hands covered in charcoal and cheese grease,
and s'mores. Do not forget the s'mores. Marshmallow stickiness.
Everything is sticky.
And I'm still making egg in the holes for my husband.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh my God. This is amazing. I love you so much. I think we'll have more conversations, but more importantly, do not ever please hesitate to reach out, to bounce ideas, to just have another sounding board. It made me think of an idea, frankly, of gathering women of my generations to just have a Zoom of where we can share more stories with you, or more importantly, help, just if you ever need, just like, these are my thoughts. How does this sound?
It's really cool. Wayland, and you've probably gotten the bulletins too. Wayland did the sports teams Zooms, and I was a part of the ski team Zoom that they did. Oh, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago or so. But it was neat. There ended up being 18 of us on there. And, we got to hang out with, there were 2 staff members from Wayland who are wonderful, wonderful people from their development office, their alumni office. And Dave Casper, George Cobb, Diane Alpa, they were all on the call.
Oh my God.
Coaches. And then what was really cool, Felicia, is that another one of the original ski team founders, 35 years ago or whatever, the gentleman's name is Phil Resch.
Oh, and yes.
I didn't know Phil Resch. I'm of a generation of students that did not know him, but Casper always talked about him and how he and Phil, started this team. So we got to meet Phil on the Zoom, which was really neat. That kind of tied all that together. But moreover, it was really neat to spend time connecting with those people, from basically like all of the, I mean, there weren't many people there, but all of the different decades were represented. I mean, dating to the very sort of the end, if you will, of ski team. I coached the team the last 2 years that it was in existence with Diane Alpaugh. And a couple people were on the call, one gal from Varsity Girls and one guy from Varsity Boys, who we coached. So it was basically like the full gamut of people from the ski team run. And that was really fun. It was nice to reconnect. It was nostalgic. It was affirming. It just felt like the good was spread, after that was done. So if that's the idea, to get Nicolet people from, certain common interests or common time periods together to, if it does nothing else other than to give people good feelings, then win.
Well, it does. And it's ironic because I don't know the story behind how you ended up Wayland, but I'd like to take not credit, but I'm hoping that somehow or another, organically, we had some sort of influence on how you guys ended up there. And I really, really have no idea. I mean, really, it could have nothing to do with Andrea and me whatsoever. But the group of people, Diane was my head mother.
Oh, sure. In Warren Cottage.
Yeah, I mean, I went there between 1977, graduating in 79. Phil, George, Dave Casper, all of those people were prominent educators in my time at Wayland. And you got to remember, when I showed up at Wayland, I was pretty broken from the things that had happened to my family, none of which I think they knew of, frankly, or I don't really think if they did, I didn't know that they did. And, I was just trying to find myself again. And I was just talking about this with another friend who I interviewed. His name is Kevin Thomas, who's now getting a doctorate in tuba playing. He graduated after myself at Wayland. Poor kid from Detroit. Asked his mom to get him out of there because he was not going to have the opportunities. Ended up at Wayland. Little did I know, he's telling me about all the stories about all this music opportunities he was given. And I was like, what are you talking about? I had been a first cellist. There was no music there for me other than musical theater.
Right.
And I think people associate me with Wayland with musical theater, because I ended up getting the lead roles in things. I wanted to play the cello. I wanted to keep playing the cello, and I didn't think that there was a way. And he's telling me these stories on the podcast about how they brought in a tuba, they got him all these classes, they did all these things, he performed with all these different groups. And I was like, what are you talking about right now?
Yeah.
Talk about a different experience. But that's the beautiful thing about us talking, is you get to reveal these things, the collectiveness of you all gathering. We did do that with a bunch of people from Wayland who were all involved with the theater.
Yeah.
But being a thespian wasn't something, I mean, the irony is being in entertainment. Yeah, I did want to continue to go on professionally, but not because I thought I was all that in a slice of bread. I mean, I'd like to think that I did some entertaining at camp and that brought value, but that's because I felt like I could be me. Mm-hmm. And so you guys brought the best out of me.
Yep.
That I could just.
That's Wayland right there to a T. I think that's so well put, that honestly, at that age, when you're working through trying to find yourself and either different external things that are going on or whatever, is that it allows you to just be you.
Yeah.
And again, they create that space either through theater or ski team or academics or the dorm or weekends or whatever it is, where, you could just be yourself. And I think that was, about Wayland, that was really cool.
Well, and I remember, indirectly, when you guys were going there and your mom, and your mom and Diana, and however that all aligned, and then it was all connected with you guys. I just remember thinking, like, I don't know how this happened, but how cool is that our lives are intertwining, but we're different decades. We may not even be talking, but somehow organically this DNA is like spinning its own wheel, and again, having nothing to do with it, but yet feeling organically like there feels like there's something in the soil here.
Yeah. Well, and you graduated in 79. Yeah. And I graduated in 97. So there you go. There's the
yes, because I'm 18 years older than you, I think. Mm-hmm. And Andrea graduated in 82 or 3. She actually had to graduate early because of Ronald Reagan being in office at the time. And any kid who was a Social Security recipient of their deceased parent had to be in college full time or would not get their money.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
Oh, yeah. So she had to graduate a semester early from Wayland her senior year. That's how I ended up at Beloit, because I was going to Columbia in film school. My mom asked me to transfer to wherever Andrea ended up getting into. She only stayed there one semester and then went to UW-Madison. Okay. And I stayed at Beloit. So, but anyhow, we've kind of gone off, but at the same time, it all intertwines with just the importance of sharing, because there's so much connection. There's so much just exactly how, you plant a tree and watch it grow.
Right.
So I love that we planted a lot of trees.
Yep.
And we're seeing the fruits of all of it.
It's pretty awesome.
It really is.
I'm really appreciative that you had me today for this, Felicia. Thank you so much.
I really hope that, first off, thank you so much. And I really hope that when you walk away from your computer, that you feel full of love, that you know that your purpose is just bountiful. Thank you. And that you are here to do some really powerful things, and you are just coming into the seasoning of who you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's really powerful stuff there.
I promise you got a huge torch within you, your own shining, beaming light. That is of value. Yes, you come from this history, but who you are as a man and who you are collectively, all the things that you've taken in and all the souls that are watching over you and sourcing through you, this is still you in your own power.
Thank you. There was a quote that really helped me 7 years ago or so, and I'll just kind of leave it at the quote, but the quote is live light, travel light, spread the light, be the light. And I really like that one.
That is perfection. Thank you so much for joining us with part 2 conversation I had with Jeremy Starz. What a treat, what a family, what a legacy, what a life ahead, what so many lives have been positively affected. It's beyond. If you at all are interested in hearing more about Camp Nicolet for Girls, meeting and hearing more about Jeremy Starz and his mom, Georgie Starz, and the legacy of the camp and what was started and what continues to be, I highly recommend reaching out because they are extraordinary. Next week, so excited to have join me my dear friend, Bobby Toberlin, who is based out of Nashville and is an award-winning, multi-nominated writer and musician for the music industry. You must tune in. Some incredible conversation is about to happen. Join me next week, next Monday, midnight, Pacific Standard Time, dropping on all listening platforms. My conversation with my dear friend, multi-nominated for his music, his writing, his incredible performer, Bobby Toberlin. Look forward to you joining. Bye for now.